My name is Hdrlicka. I didn't grow up in a place of war. I grew up mainly in Canada. I remember we lived in Iran and we also lived in Bahrain, places that weren't accustomed to seeing little white redheaded girls running around. But I always had this fond sense of the Middle East. Meeting and working people from the Arab world was just, it was like being at home. I was the founding organizer of CNESI, the Canadian Network to End Sanctions on Iraq. Our goal of the organization at that time was to raise awareness about the destructive sanctions that were destroying Iraq and its people. So a lot of my work was here in Canada, trying to debunk the idea that war was good. I went to Iraq as a human rights observer. My goal there was to hear what was happening on the ground, speak directly with the people being affected by war, to hear their stories. It was 8 months after the war had begun, and George Bush, the President of the United States at that time, was telling the world that Iraq was on the road to recovery. We who'd been working on the issue and that were passionate about Iraq knew that that wasn't the case. We needed to bring those stories back. And so we went to Iraq and we were able to see firsthand the devastation of the war, the reality of war, what war brings. Many people were sick, many people didn't have access to healthcare, many people were being bombed, families were being destroyed and killed. And so this idea of a foreign nation, of a foreign country coming in and saying, we're bringing you democracy, is a ridiculous thought, because democracy can only be built from within. So it was this amazing opportunity to hear those stories, and the big piece of those stories was that we are the cradle of civilization here in Iraq, and this is a bump in the road for us. It inspired me to come home and tell those stories, but tell it in a way that we can do better. We can help the people of Iraq, and we can pursue and support them and move with them beyond this. A year and a half later, when I went to Iraq in 2005, there was this feeling that things were different, and it's this intuition and this feeling that I felt in the air. If you think of a corkscrew, that's how we had to fly into Iraq. From that experience, I was very dizzy and my stomach was queasy. For the first few hours, I felt really out of sorts. And I thought, okay, maybe it was just from the corkscrew. But over the next 2 days, as we went and talked to people, I started to realize that it wasn't the corkscrew landing that had made me continue this queasiness and this uneasiness that I was feeling. What it was, as I'm hearing these stories of desperation, of disbelief that this could be their future, things had not gotten better. They'd gotten worse. And at that point, I realized that what I was feeling was this feeling of hopelessness, being around such sadness, lack of hope for the future for themselves, but for their children, wondering how do people get by when thinking that their kids aren't going to have an opportunity to have a family, but they have to live through it every day. And I felt this idea of a Great Depression. I felt I didn't belong anywhere. I felt that the work that I've done for the last 5 or 6 years was very difficult to comprehend, because Iraq wasn't changing, it was getting worse. So all the work that we'd been doing here on the ground, all the work we'd been doing internationally to raise awareness about this war, how was it helping the life of those Iraqis? And so I got further consumed in that sadness that I brought back from Iraq. Until a few months later, I received this picture in the mail from my sister, and it was a picture of my niece. As I sat and I looked at this little baby, I realized that it just kind of triggered something in me, and I went to look at my album of Iraq, and I came across this picture of this beautiful little baby, and she was 8 months old at the time. I just put these babies' pictures side by side, and I was overwhelmed with such emotion. Take away the fact that these little girls looked alike, I realized at that time that that little girl in Iraq could have been my niece, and my niece could have been her. And my idea that I needed to do this work in Iraq maybe wasn't what I needed to do for myself and for my community and for the betterment of the world that I live in. Maybe looking at where I live was something that I could do that I could support my niece here in Canada and work towards social justice. I think when you go to a country, you have such a luxury of coming back to Canada. And so the challenge for me was doing my best, respecting them and what they were going through. I think a lot of people, this idea of the white person saving the day, that was not something that I wanted to fall into, because these stories were not my story, they were the stories of the people of Iraq. That was such an incredibly empowering experience to not be supporting this violence that was all around you. I mean, at moments it was scary, but it was just this wonderful feeling of saying, I'm not supporting this. I'm going to support the people that are around me by saying, I'm here for you. I'm not here with violence. I'm here for you as a person. I learned that in the midst of such violence and chaos and turmoil, that the human spirit just comes out and emerges in people in such amazing and beautiful ways. We would be driving down the street and there were people that had pulled over on the side of the road and they had a flat tire. I mean, this is the midst of, there's bombings going on. People are stopping on the side of the road to help them with their tire. I mean, these wonderful, wonderful actions that spoke to me and just revitalized that optimism that I've always had in the human spirit, but it showed in such great examples in Iraq. It's what kept me going through the difficult times of speaking out on the war. From my experience, I would say, even though that period when I came back from Iraq the second time was so devastating, what I would say is for anyone is to follow their passion. Life is going to be challenging, but living your dream and living your truth and following through with that for me has been my life. It has inspired me to do incredible things that if I would have just followed what everyone around me was telling me how I should live my life, then I would have had different adventures. But by sticking to my gut, my truth, to listening to the people around me that I admired, that I have been able to live this incredible journey. And I continue to do that. I just get motivated and inspired wherever I go because I follow that passion. Wherever we are, war affects each and every one of us. It might not affect us directly, but it affects all sorts of aspects of our lives that we might not find out about. We need to recognize that war is not just about bombing strategically and hitting military structures. War is about destroying people's lives and spirits and hopes. And it doesn't help anyone when we do that to each other.